So today is the second part of a two-part series that I'm doing on construction company succession planning. And in the first video I did, I interviewed Louis Weiher of Carmel Builders, who bought the business from his mom and dad. And today I have with me Barbara and Tom Weiher, who are the original owners of Carmel Builders, who sold the business to their son Louis. And I thought it would be really fun to, my interview with Louis was super interesting to hear from his point of view as a second generation buying the business from his mom and dad. But I thought, it would be great to really hear from Tom and Barbara. What was their experience like? And what does it take as business owners to come to the conclusion that we, A, really are ready to sell our business, B, that we can sell our business, C, what is that like when we succeed our business to the next generation when it's family? And, they have a perspective that I'm excited to have them share with you about what does it take to really do that and navigate it, and what were some of the challenges they faced, and what would they do differently, and what did they do that has worked really well that they're happy with. So I'm just going to jump in. Tom and Barbara, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time and your experience with listeners.
We are happy to be here. I'm going to just point out that our name is Weiher. No. It's not Weir, although it's spelled Weir. It's Weiher.
Weiher, I apologize. And
no problem.
You know what? And
it happens all the time.
And Louis told me that when we interviewed the last time, and I got it right the last time, and then I kind of messed it up. So I apologize. All right. Well, we're going to keep going. Thank you for letting me know. So tell us a little bit about what brought you. You were in business for how long, when it was that you kind of came to the decision of, I want to sell my business? Was there something that precipitated it? Like, just kind of give us an idea of what was sort of some of the background of that, and then we'll kind of dig into what was that experience like for you?
I would say it wasn't any one event or any one moment where a thought or idea came to me. Over a period of time, as I got older into the business, I would say maybe 10, 15 years ago, or prior to retirement, I began to think, how's this going to end? Where are we going to go with it? And Barbara and I discussed and said, the ideal situation would be if one of our children would be interested in taking over the business, and that they would be able to buy it from us by funding our retirement. And we could stay on as some consultants over a period of time, and it would fund our retirement, and the business would continue on.
So Tom, can I just interrupt you for a second and ask you a quick question? Were any of your kids at that point in the business, working in the business with you? And you have 5 kids, right?
Yes.
5.
Okay.
I think all of them worked with us at one time or another, part-time, college, working in college, things like that. But in a direct answer to your question, nobody, none of them were working with us at that time, or indicated that they were even remotely interested in going forward and perhaps purchasing the business and running it when we were ready for retirement.
So here you were.
That initial idea.
You were ready to look at where's my exit strategy. You look at these 5 kids and go, nobody's working in the business, but maybe right. Somebody wants to. So yeah, okay. So then what happened?
Well, as it drew closer, we started floating. Louis did come to work for us. I should say that came first. Louis did come to work for us, and through a series of events and decisions on his part, and he started taking a genuine interest in the business, and we floated the idea past him several times, and at first it was, well, maybe, I don't know, it was lukewarm at best. But over time, the idea began to grow with him.
And actually, we had asked him to help us with our accounting systems after I came on board, which was in the fall of 2002. I could see there was a lot of work that we needed to do to get our QuickBooks in better shape. and to utilize it more fully. Lewis was trained with accounting when he had received his degree, and he knew a lot more about how to set this up than we did. So he moved back to the area, which was not part of our plan. It was something that just happened for him. And when he moved back to the area, we asked him if he would step into the office and work part-time for us to get things in order.
Okay.
At that time, we discussed, and I mentioned to Tom, I felt we needed another person working alongside of him that could assist us with building our sales and increasing our sales. And so we spoke to him about that after he had been working part-time for a while. And he really gave it some thought. And it was at that point, he didn't give us a quick answer. He gave it thought. And like Tom said, at first he was a little like, oh, I don't know about that. But then he came back and he said, you know, I've been thinking about this. And yes, I'd like to give it a try. Now, a few years later, he had a little bit of backpedaling that went on.
Okay.
Maybe we'll get to that later.
Okay.
But at that time, he said, yes, he did want to do that.
Okay. All right.
And
So
when he came on board, we call it our restructuring at that time.
Okay.
And at that, going forward from that time, our day-to-day conversations and started to go in that direction. We talked about, well, when this happens, or you can this might be the case, or you might want to do things this way, and that it became part of our communication, our daily, weekly, monthly communication. It was not a foreign subject anymore. It was something we started becoming comfortable with.
All right, great. So you realized you were looking to start to look at what's my retirement strategy, and would any of the kids be interested in coming into the business? At first it was no, and then Lewis, who is your oldest, said, okay, yeah, maybe we can do this. Right. So then I know that from our discussion, and also from Lewis. So how did you go, so just talk about how did that process then unfold in doing this? And I know that there were some things along the way that were kind of hiccups for you guys, and just maybe talk a little bit, I'll dig a little bit deeper in terms of, I think there's always the financial side of it and people are curious about that and what have you, but maybe if you could just talk about how was this process for you once you sort of came to, okay, Lewis said, yes, I'd consider this. Then how did that unfold for you guys?
Well, I think we said at one point in time, we need to find somebody that can help us steer through this and navigate what this all means.
And our first step with that really was being involved in a group called the Alternative Board. And I don't know if that's something you've ever heard of, but it's an organization that gets like companies together, and they're coached on what they need to do to establish a more successful company and a more well-balanced company and everything that's involved in having a business, a growing business. And that certainly includes the discussion of the financials too, but planning goals and setting strategies.
So I joined the Alternative Board, and through that process, we were led to the fact that we needed to find somebody that could help us navigate through this idea of succession. Mm-hmm. And so we just amongst ourselves, I said, look, why don't the three of us each pick somebody to interview, to talk and present our thoughts to, and see what comes of it.
How did you find somebody?
Well, I selected somebody. I was very involved with our Milwaukee chapter of NARI, and had been involved in strategic planning sessions there for several years. And I said, I'm going to speak to the facilitator who led the strategic planning portion of our work there for those years, and see if I could get a referral. So that's how I chose my person to bring to the table. Barbara? We
had decided that we would each try to find a person, and mine kind of dropped in my lap. I went to a networking event and met Peter Gersh, who at that time the name of his company was Cathedral Consulting. Since then it's now Gersh Consulting. And he I really liked him. And he explained to me the business that he was involved with and that he was a business consultant for small family-owned businesses specifically. That was his specialty. And I thought he would be an excellent choice for us to interview, because our thought was we'd each have an opportunity to pick somebody, and then we'd interview them together and come to a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And the person that Lewis chose was someone that he had been referred to, as I recall. And then we interviewed them.
He was a business coach.
He was a business coach. His focus was more on the accounting, the financial side of it. And the coach you had chosen, they were all very good, very skilled. The coach the person you had chosen focused more on coaching itself and developing strategies. And leadership
yes.
and development and that type of thing.
Okay.
Gersh Consulting, or at that time Cathedral, seemed to have all of those attributes. And they had the added benefit of focusing on small businesses. Family-owned businesses, right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
They understood, it was clear to all three of us that he understood the dynamics of what that was: parents, eldest son, running a business, the emotions, the dynamics that are involved there. He stood out.
Okay.
Famous.
So and I remember Lewis talking a little bit about this too. So the person that you chose, ultimately, it wasn't just somebody who had coaching skills, business skills, the numbers kind of skills, but you were looking for someone who could understand that dynamic of that relationship of family and parents and children and succeeding within your family and those dynamics that would come up. So that's great. So you had somebody who had all of those other skills, but also who could understand and help you navigate through that piece of it. So that's a great transition actually to, so what was that process like, and where were the kind of the sticking points for you, and as a family, like what, just kind of talk about that, like what were those things, because those are kind of the I don't know what I don't know is going to show up for a lot of people.
Right. And that's really what it was. Yeah. We had a lot of help from Cathedral Consulting and Peter Gersh specifically. The company had a very well-developed system, and it was called a family succession planning assessment process, if I've got it right. If not, it was very close to that.
Okay.
And they had very specific steps that we followed to develop to narrow down what we felt we needed to accomplish. And it took quite a long time. And the very first part of it was personal interviews with us a couple of times, where we were taken aside one by one and asked questions, and some of them kind of on the personal side as far as your feelings, and then others that were more practical, like what would we expect and what would we be hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So what can you add to that?
Well, I think that he was particularly skilled, and their system was particularly skilled in not allowing any of us to avoid anything.
The difficult,
the touchy questions, the things that you just knew were going to come across as a challenge, and did you want to face that,
will you share a couple of those? Not to share necessarily your personal answer, but like, what were some of those tough, because I like tough questions, because I think they're the things that like really get at the juicy stuff that really drives our behavior and our beliefs, right? So would you just share what are some of those questions that they asked that people who are listening to this might want to ask for themselves that maybe they haven't considered? Like
specifics about, the money, how much money do you want? How much money do you think you need? How much money do you think you can afford to pay us from our perspective? Questions like that, which are very direct, and they're easy to ask in general to to people at a business meeting or something, but to talk to your sibling, to your children or to your parents, and say, it's a very direct question. You shy away, kind of struggle with asking the question and getting a straight answer.
And it's an interesting thing when you develop this relationship with your children, because no matter the age of your children, you still are parent-child to some extent. Mm-hmm. And particularly when it comes to mutual ownership and developing a program where your child is going to be taking over your baby in a way, because that's what it is. Yeah. This company had very humble beginnings and has grown to a very successful company. So it's kind of like it's been our baby. And so the questions did ask things like, how much involvement do you think you are going to need after you pass over succession, or and the transfer of ownership takes place? Do you feel that you will want to be involved in the business directly? Does it bother you, the thought of being told what to do by your child? Things like that.
That's a good one.
And it's been quite a while now since we've been through the process, and we've been fully retired now for a few years, and so it's sort of hard to remember the specifics. But it really dug into those things that can really hit you in a spot that you didn't expect, I guess.
Yeah, and your answers to those things can come. You're kind of sensitive to the fact that what I'm about to say is going to sound very blunt, and I don't want it to be, and you see the reaction, and you can see it coming, and you hem and haw, and you back off a little bit. And the great thing with our consultant, with Peter, was he would gently and steadily just keep pushing it forward, and help disarm things, and put out a little spark that's going to flare up here, put out the fire before it gets going. And just gently but firmly just keep us moving and holding our feet to the fire, to use that same analogy.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And we wanted to keep things very as even keel as possible, because as I think I explained to you before, we have always felt that the primary issue we did not want to happen was to have some kind of family rift that would damage our relationships, because we have a very close family. We're very blessed with that, and we're very grateful for that. And we didn't want anything to get in the way of that. And so we wanted to be sure that going through this process didn't do any damage, that we were able to speak honestly and frankly without wounding each other.
Right.
And,
saying something that we would regret and through our emotions or anything like that. So we it was that general sort of difficulty, if you want to call it that. But again, I put all the tribute to our consultant. He was so skilled at just keeping us on track.
It sounds like he was very good at helping you facilitate, as you so nicely described, what was challenging and difficult conversations, and conversations at the level that you want to keep those relationships intact. Obviously, especially with your children, it's that relationship is more important than any business. Right. But I also really appreciate that, I'm listening to you, and as a I have a very direct personality, and I tend not to shy away from money and number conversations, because I have this belief about numbers that they always tell a story and they illuminate things, and it's like it brings the sense of clarity and confidence. And one of the things I appreciate in listening to the two of you is that that can be very difficult for people, and it can be difficult to ask for what you want. It can be difficult for you to say a number out loud that you're like, how's that going to be held with somebody else, and is that a reasonable number? And I even appreciate it to the degree that when you think about it, that this is what happens even in sales conversations in business.
Sure.
When we're talking with people about money and they're like, am I going to offend them when I tell them my budget number? Or,
Right.
so it's that thing of, how do we navigate our way through this? And again, especially with families. So it sounds like your facilitator and coach did a great job in helping you. I liked what you said, that he kept pushing the conversation gently forward.
Yes.
And really creating a safe space for you to be able to answer the questions
Sure.
that would have otherwise kind of been uncomfortable to talk about. So
I might add to this too, that this is one of the things that surprised me about this process, because in my business, on my business side, like the example you just brought up about speaking to a homeowner, a customer, a client, I had no problem with that. The numbers, this is the way it is. But here I discovered, I'm talking to my son, it kind of floored me how tentative I was, and it uncovered that within myself that I was not aware of, and it was just I think a sensitivity that I had towards him and with him, for him, and everything. I get again that is only there because of father-son relationship.
Sure.
Yeah. No, I think the one thing that's important for people to understand, though, Vicki, is that this takes time, and it takes a commitment, and it takes money. And we have been a successful company, but we certainly were not rolling in dough. We're much more farther ahead in our financials than we were when this started. So it was a big commitment for us. And I don't know if your clients being on the West Coast and where you are in San Francisco area, if that's an issue. But I think it's important to at least mention it, because because some people, no matter where they're at, are going to balk at the money. Mm-hmm. And because they think, what do I want to spend that? I know what I'm doing in this business. Why should I have to do that? I think that's a fairly common attitude. I can take care of this. I don't need to spend that kind of money. Well, I think you have to be willing to make a commitment. Certainly you have to be within your level of comfort. But I think that's a big issue. The time, the commitment, and the money it takes to do this.
It was money well spent. No question about it. I mean, I would never look back on that. It was, we realized we got an incredible value for the money that we spent on doing this.
That's great.
We could not have done it any other way.
That's great.
And it's interesting because people in our industry, that's what they're selling, is the value. It's the value of what they do. Right. It's not just it's the product, yes. It's the service.
It's way more beyond price, right? So, yep. So one of the things when we had been talking originally, as we were preparing for this interview, you guys talked about getting your financial house in order during this process. Can you just speak to that, and what does that mean, and what did that involve?
Okay, I'll jump in first.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Carmel Builders started back in 1979 as a one-man show, me, and I kind of grew with it and wore all the hats of production, sales, and business management. And then as time went on, I brought on people, and it continued to grow. The recession in 2008 really, we were doing very well in 2006, 2007, and it was at that time I was really starting to think, wow, this might be a good time to start thinking about retirement. And financially, we were really flying high. 2008 hit, and the bottom fell out for us here in the Midwest, and this is when things really got tough. Where am I going?
Well,
just saying, so I was asking about the financial, so you getting your financial house in order. You had talked about that was part of what you did in this process.
Sure. So in recovery from that, in the next several years, is when I think Barbara used that term about recovering, getting our financial house in order. The whole idea in 2008, 9, and 10 about retirement was put on hold then, because we had to recover, we had to get our finances up in order and get back, regain the things that we lost in our investments.
Well, and beyond that, yes, we had to, first of all, just keep things going, and it was a
Right.
matter of survival, really. And that we wanted to make sure everything was okay. And gratefully, because of our reputation, we weathered that storm really quite well, a lot better than most people did. And what we needed to do, however, was to continue to look at how do we keep the ball rolling? How do we continue to stay healthy financially? That process began with the alternative board, and it moved into Cathedral Consulting as we went through the succession planning. And again, that Peter and his process took us to the next level. Lewis had a lot of knowledge of this, which was extremely beneficial as well. Yeah.
So what did that involve? What did that involve when you were doing this with the consulting team, and when Lewis came in and helped you? Was that you put an operating budget in place? Because I know there were some things about the elements of this that had to do with you knowing that the company could produce a certain, because I'm going to ask you in a second about how did you structure the financial side of this, because there were elements, as I recall you telling me and Lewis too, that there were elements about getting the profitability of the business at a certain level when you talk about financial house in order, that related to your ability to be able to comfortably go, I'm going to make this deal with you, but I got to know that you can consistently produce a consistent profit. So what were the kind of things that you did that allowed you to do that?
Well, Peter has established a financial dashboard, and at every board meeting, and we were having them every month at this point, and for many years. We started with Cathedral Consulting, we determined at the end of 2013, and we did not complete the actual succession plan until 2016, at the end of 2016, when it was really finalized and the papers were drawn up. So one of the things that he did was have this financial dashboard that helped us take a look at where we are at with our sales, with our overhead, with our gross income, our net income. We went through that every single month, and we had specific goals put in place.
Okay.
We were working to achieve specific goals, and we had metrics that we were evaluating. And we looked at and of course, now the names of these things are just totally flying out of my head because I want to talk about them. But we looked at the financials of cash flow, the P&L, and the, what's the other one?
Balance sheet.
Balance sheet.
Yeah.
And we looked at that every month. And we compared it to the previous year. And we were very scrupulous with taking a look at that. And the budget, have we been on target with our budget that we had set? We became more fastidious about setting our budget and tried to be very realistic. Where can we pull in a little bit? Where must we let go a little bit? It was that whole process. And again, that was where we received a lot of help from Peter, because he was very good at keeping us on task. Those once a month board meetings at that time it wasn't uncommon for them to go for 2 to 3 hours regularly.
And the first half was financials. We spent all of our time just drilling into everything. And
so I love what you're talking about, because this is a lot of the work that I do with clients, is right on what you're talking about, is that ability to start to build a set of feedback systems, first set goals, right? And then create feedback systems so that you're measuring your results against those goals, and then managing the gap between where you are and where you said you want to be. And what it does is it allows you to create a more consistent result, to start to have a better discipline about how you're managing results in your business.
It really, yes.
If I recall what you said, part of what was important to you about that was that's also the thing that let you know that if that system was in place in the business, that discipline would continue, when you weren't there day in and day out, month in and month out, to have those meetings, although I believe you said you're still involved with those meetings, but that what it does is it produces a more consistent result in your business so that you can count on that result more. So, I mean, I just want to kind of earmark this for anybody who's listening, because I think it's a super important point about when you're looking to sell the business and you're going to be bought out over time, or you're going to have, and I'm going to ask you this, we'll talk about how you arranged the financial side of your succession plan with Lewis in a second. But the thing about being able to count on that the business is continuing to generate a profit that can pay you, that next generation is buying you out with, that when you set your financial house in order and you set goals and you manage against those goals, you're developing that muscle of discipline for managing for results, and it will produce a more consistent result. So
absolutely.
And it did.
That's great. Yeah.
It did, and it continues to do so.
That's
We
great.
meet now once a quarter as opposed to once a month, and our meetings are much shorter, and it's.
Yeah, you got that you got that
But,
down.
that was a real process, and it was something that we really had to labor through sometimes, but it was very beneficial to us. So yes, we had a certain idea in mind of where we wanted our sales to be before we made this step. And so we had to go through that
among other
process.
things. Sales was one of the targets.
and other structures.
It's one of the indicators that we're looking at.
Right.
Business development and standard operating procedures, et cetera. Yeah. So it was really worthwhile.
Everything everything really flows out of the numbers. I mean, once you know the numbers, and you can look at the numbers and see what they mean and where they've been and where they are and where you want them to be, everything flows out of that, and it just makes a lot of sense. And as Barbara said, we learned all of that. I thought we understood the numbers, but this was a whole awakening for us.
Not well enough.
Not well enough.
One of the things that I always say is that when you have the practice of managing by results and you manage by the data and by the numbers, what it does is it gives us more clarity. And when we have more clarity, we have more confidence, and we have more confidence, we take more powerful actions. We make more powerful and spot on decisions about business. And so good for you for taking that.
All of this emerged out of this for us in that way. And the confidence and the decision making of how we're going to do the succession emerged, and it really came out of that structure. As Barbara said, we were meeting for several years with Peter, reviewing the numbers and going, and all of it came together with that. That was always our basis.
That's great. That's great. Well, so let's kind of transition this a little bit. Tell us how you ended up structuring the buyout. So there's lots of different ways that one can structure a buyout. And just share with us, if you will, how you approached this.
Well, again, we followed our consultant, who laid out several ideas and ways that he had worked with other families and laid out a number for us. And actually, the model we chose was to have two different classes of stock, of voting shares and non-voting shares. And the voting shares actually were dealt with the controls of the company. And Barbara and I each received a third, or 30% of those shares. So that was for a total of 60%. And Lewis received 40%. So in a coalition of decisions or control, Barbara and I together would hold the majority.
So that's interesting. So what you're talking about is you own less of the company, which I want you to talk about here in a second. I know you own 6%, right? And then Lewis owns 94%.
Yes.
Correct.
In terms of the shares that relate to profitability, but then there's this other arrangement that you established that has to do with voting shares.
Yes.
Right.
What that did, if I hear you correctly, is it allowed the two of you to still have a senior voice in how the company was run,
Yes.
or that the company couldn't be sold, or couldn't be, there couldn't be some major significant decision made about the business and the structure of the business and the entity without you guys weighing in on it at 30% each.
That's right.
So that you could feel like you still were able to support the overall success of the company going forward, and that you weren't just leaving it to like, who knows, Lewis has a bad day or whatever, and gets sick of it and goes, I'm out of here, and sells it. We couldn't do that because
right.
you still have the majority voting shares.
That's correct.
Yes.
That is correct.
And that was the primary purpose of that, really, because our majority of voting shares does not allow us to interfere with the day-to-day operations. We really have no voice in that, and we are there to assist, to advise, to discuss, to be creative in our thought process, and help have our experience, as it will provide some benefit to Lewis, but we can't make the decisions.
So from an operational point of view, you can't, but when it comes to like the things that that require corporate voting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
We're supposed to be reviewing Lewis on an annual basis too, as a board, which we haven't. Well, we haven't really done it. We realized that we hadn't really done it, and we discussed that at a board meeting. I believe at our last board meeting, and we decided we should do that at the end of the year.
Great.
And that there should be something that there should be a review of Lewis by the board, and it's probably going to be all good, but it's just a good idea.
Our former consultant, Peter, also sits on the board as a non-voting member.
Yeah.
Non-voting on anything. He's simply is there as
an advisor.
But that's been a great transition for us, because in the month-to-month and yearly operations on the board level, having Peter's experience, where all of us are comfortable with him, know him so well.
That's great.
It's been immeasurably helpful throughout that too, steering us through little touchy subjects and things.
Yeah. So
we're still family.
Yeah, exactly, right? So would you talk about the financial, how did you end up, what's the financial arrangement you ended up with?
Sure.
In the buyout, like tell me the numbers piece of it.
Well, the numbers piece that we determined that the value of the company is one times the gross profit of the year before. Okay, so that's the actual value of the company. However, the reality is that Tom and I, after 35 years at that time, 35 years of being in the business, did need to have a substantial buyout in order to keep our financial situation in place.
Mm-hmm.
And we had an assessment of what we needed based on our retirement monies, based on our Social Security, and based on what the company could give us. And we determined a specific number of what we felt we would need to continue the lifestyle we had spent the last 35 plus years developing. And
so that was the income, actually. We determined that our yearly income would need to be from the company.
From the company.
So you figured out how much you needed, and then how did you structure the deal?
Well, we're on the board of directors, and we get paid very nicely for being on the board of directors.
Okay.
And that's really what happens. And that it protects us, and it protects Lewis. It's a firm number. It's part of it's below the line, but it's an expense that's non-negotiable. It's there. And I should say, in theory, non-negotiable. We would always be willing to discuss it if the need would arise.
If if the survival of the company was somehow hinged to it.
Okay. And is there a time frame for that, or is it, so you own how you structure the percentage ownership, you still own 6% of the bottom line, but you get paid a salary basically for being a board member.
Yes.
Is there a time frame for when that goes out until, or is it indefinite? Or
Well, we have a couple of scenarios based upon both of us being alive, one of us not being alive. So that was all written into the agreement as well. So we covered a lot of different scenarios as far as time-wise went.
okay. So you structured it so that the company is giving you a salary and profits of your 6%, those distributions. You figured out first, how much money do I need? And then how do we structure a deal within the business so that the business, we still have some involvement, right?
Right.
We still have voting shares. The business gives us a salary for our involvement, and the salary and the profits are sufficient to cover what is our personal, financial needs.
Okay. And it also, it was something that was acceptable to Lewis too, because then he did not have to come up with a chunk of money.
Mm-hmm.
And we did decide, this is nothing that's written into our bylaws, but we did decide we would reevaluate as time moved on. And as we determined that our needs were less, we're still in relatively good health. We have, we think, quite a few years to go yet. And we want to enjoy these years. We've worked hard to enjoy these years. But after that stage of our life moves on, we won't have the same level of needs. So we'll look at it. We will discuss these things, and we'll be open to it as long as Tom and I just finished completing our will and our powers of attorney, make sure everything's in order there. It's all wrapped up with our trust, everything else. We've got all those ducks in a row now. And we feel really pretty good about where everything's standing right now. But it took a lot of work and a lot of time.
I got to add one thing too. Something that really struck me through this process, and especially as we were starting to talk about the cost to the company and the income for ourselves. I was really struck by the fact that how much care and concern Lewis had for us, and he wanted to make sure, and he's checked up on that several times since. Is this working? Are things going well for you? Is this as we had hoped it would be? And that was very important. And it really, in a way, kind of surprised me. We never talked about stuff like that before, but then to have him ask me those kind of questions with real meaning.
I was really struck by that the very first time I ever talked to Lewis, and every time since then, and we've probably chatted a half a dozen times. That is consistently just shown up in his conversation, not like a point he was making, but just his care and concern for the two of you, and that you were taken care of, and not from a coddling place, but from a place of really respect and appreciation for the many years that went into building this business, what it took for you and the courage it took to create the business and to start the business and grapple with all of the starting a business and keeping a business successful and the transition that you went through. I mean, he just has such a deep appreciation and respect for that is so evident in his communication about this whole transition with you guys, and I think it's admirable. And
it is. We know we're very fortunate, like we said, but sometimes it takes something like this to really bring it home. When you see how sincerely he cares. And,
you learn a whole nother thing about your kids, right?
Yeah, right.
No, there's one final thing that I would like you to ask you about, because I think this is a super important piece in terms of the transition. There's 3 different levels of transition that you're going through here, right? One is just the legal shifting of the entity, which is kind of while it required a whole lot of things that happen in the background, from an operational point of view, it is not as significant for your team and for your organization. And the more important two pieces that affect your organization day in and day out are the management and then the leadership. And management is, I'm moving into the role of being a manager as I'm working my way up the ranks. But then leadership is this whole other piece of, I'm the one that has the final say. And that's where I see that's where there's a big transition or a challenge, or the thing that really needs attention, if you will, within an organization, making this change of leadership, whether it's succeeding to the next generation of family or the next generation of employees. That transition of shifting from Tom, in your case, Tom's the guy who's the final word, and Barbara, to Louis is the final word. It's Louis's trajectory of where we're going and what we're up to, and it's not Tom and Barbara's anymore. Can you just speak to how did you navigate that? And what advice do you have for people about how to do that successfully?
Well, yeah, that wasn't as difficult for me as I maybe thought it might be. I really just wanted to leave that behind, and I kind of said to myself right from the start, I'll involve myself to whatever degree I'm asked. And try to use that as my discernment, as opposed to jumping in and saying, hey, I hear this and that is going on. I think you should do this, you should do that, or anything. We try to just deal with things at our board meeting, and we keep it to the point of we're not going to do any managing. We're not involved in management. We're looking at end results with the numbers, how do things put together, how are the goals met, et cetera, and we'll address them on a board level through good communication.
Early on, though, Tom, how did you guys navigate that with your team? Because by that point, you've got a whole team of people that are in place. As you're bringing Louis in, you're in this 3-year cycle of working through this process. And it's during those 3 years when you made the transition of Louis going from employee to manager to leader. That's what I'm talking about. Like, so with the team, we didn't really have a drop-off point and a starting point. For one thing, it was a process. I often talk to people and they ask you, how did you deal with retirement? How about the day you retired? I don't even know what day I retired. I don't even remember when I really retired. I faded away. Okay.
There was a reason.
Does this mean we need to tell Louis he needs to give you a retirement party?
He kind of did. He kind of did when he went down to receive that national award. Yeah, it was a bit of a retirement party like that. Yeah.
Okay.
But Tom, I think it's important to mention that Tom had a health issue that came up before that.
Sure.
And it precipitated the need that he had to back off.
Yeah.
The stress of daily. And he did. Tom, and even before that, Tom's not your typical family business owner. He never felt this sense of propriety in letting go and giving this authority to his
I was grateful.
Son. He was grateful, yeah. And he didn't have trouble detaching, which I think is highly irregular. I don't think that's typical. I think I had a harder time than Tom did.
Okay.
I was still working for several years after he retired. And I just decided once we actually completed the execution of the succession plan and all the legal work was done, I realized that I would have a real struggle answering to him, and not that it would be best if I would be out of the way, because I didn't want to create those any dissension. And I knew that I would be butting heads with him, so I said, okay, it's time for me to really fully retire.
Yeah.
as opposed to what I planned, which was to work part-time.
I think the fact that we were also interested in our own self-interest, that the company succeed,
Yes.
that
We wanted that more than anything else.
we really wanted that, and we didn't want to get in the way. And so it was easier to say, okay, what would you like me to do? Or can I help with this or that? As opposed to jumping in because we wanted to safeguard our own interests as well. Sure. And that's the way everything was set up and structured. So we had to let go. And I wanted to. I was relieved.
Yeah.
Well, you did a great job. And I think this is probably a good place for us to wrap this up. Thank you. I think that the kind of information and just listening to the two of you, what you've shared today, I think is going to be super helpful and valuable to other people who are facing this transition in their business. So thanks so much, Barbara and Tom, for your time. I really appreciate it. And for those of you listening, I'm going to repost what is the 12 tips for succession planning that I posted in part 1 of this video series. I hope you found today's video helpful. If you're ready to take your next step in your leadership journey and to build a great contracting business, I encourage you to check out my book, The Profit Bleed. It's full of great tools and resources that will help you implement the processes and the systems and the structure that will allow you to build a more profitable business, allow you to work less hours, and help you reclaim the joy and fun in your business and in your life again.